Hahnemann received for his remarkable discoveries nothing but opposition, hatred, contempt, and calumny from his medical brethren. At length he could stand this no longer, and he appealed from the prejudice and injustice of his professional brethren to the public, and henceforth published his essays and papers in a magazine of general literature and science entitled General Gazette of the Germans. In this journal, he published a series of brilliant essays that won for homeopathy the support of the general intelligent public, and, as Dudgeon puts it, the doctrines which were scornfully rejected by the scribes and Pharisees of the old school, found favor with the public, and the number of his admirers and non-medical disciples increased from day to day. In 1810, he published the first edition of his great Organon, and then returned to Leipzig, where he soon became surrounded by a numerous crowd of patients, admirers, and followers. While treating his detractors and calumniators with silent contempt, Hahnemann worked away at proving medicines and collecting pathogenetic symptoms, and in 1811, he began with the first volume of his glorious Materia Medica Pura, that constitutes the grandest monument ever erected by any physician in the Western world. At the period at which we have now arrived, viz., 1811, Hahnemann's great idea was to establish a Leipzig school of homeopathy, for the purpose of teaching the rising generation of physicians with homeopathy, both theoretically and practically, by founding a college with hospital attached. He had, however, to content himself with giving a course of lectures on the principles and practice of homeopathy to those medical men and medical students who wished to be instructed in the subject. To this end, he had to obtain permission from the medical faculty to become a private docent. This was readily granted, most probably in the hope that in defending his thesis he would show himself to be the ignorant, shallow character which his detractors had announced him to be. He remained at Leipzig till 1821, where he was enjoying a very large practice and making untold converts to his new system. He had then reached the age of 66. But his professional brethren in Leipzig could not bear his success. They could find nothing against him. He led an exemplary life, almost entirely in the bosom of his own numerous and happy family. He was almost worshipped by his patients, and he was already at the head of a considerable number of talented physicians. He did everything in his power, even at this late period, to infuse his reform into the profession itself, but the profession spurned him and his better way. The medical profession expected he would come to grief in defending his thesis, and they were there to witness his downfall. He did not fall, however, but rather so staggered his opponents with his great learning that none of them any longer dared hope to hurt him on that side. Then they tried it on at his lectures in the Leipzig University, but they found in him their master.
Disease is but a modified mode of action, a vibratory change. It can easily convince every reflecting person that the diseases of men depend on no substances, no acridity, that is, no material principle of diseases, but they are solely the arrangements of the spiritual power that animates the human body, the vital force.
They could not impeach him for anything, or even cook up a scandal against him, so they resolved to play the old game that had succeeded so well at Königslutter, 22 years previously. They incited the Guild of Apothecaries against him for giving away his own medicines. This was the great crime of the noble old seer. An injunction was obtained against him, and he was forbidden to give his own medicines under pains and penalties. Hence he had to quit Leipzig and his much-loved Saxon fatherland. At this time Hahnemann was the most celebrated physician of his country, and drew many from far and near to consult him. In consideration of this, and in consideration of his advancing years, he was over 66, one might have thought that the kind and gentle old man would have been spared by a liberal profession, of which he had been so distinguished a member for 42 years. But no, he had to leave the place that had become dear to him, and find a new home once again. We thus note that Leipzig expelled Hahnemann in 1821 because he dispensed his own remedies. There is no doubt that Hahnemann was very much distressed at this treatment. You remember he had been a student at Leipzig, and this city was, therefore, the site of his youthful castles in the air. It was there, too, that he had got into the terrible slough of despondency from which the Cinchona experiment saved him. And it was there he had at last triumphantly taught, where he had laboriously learned so many long years before, and it was there, too, that he had his first disciples, whom he loved so much. But his expulsion from Leipzig was necessary for the further development of his system. The reigning prince of Unhalt-Köthen was an ardent admirer of Hahnemann, and he offered him state rank and protection at his little capital, Köthen, which Hahnemann accepted, and thereby immortalized both the prince and his capital. At Köthen Hahnemann may be said to have entered into a haven of rest. When I go over his wondrous life, I am profoundly impressed with his greatness as a mere man. He taught Hebrew at the age of 13, he knew 8 languages when he went to the university at 20, he became a doctor of medicine at 24, he lived to be nearly 90, and labored all the time. Throughout the course of this long life I do not find one single shameful act recorded against him by real history. Of how many men can we say as much? He was indeed a great, and almost a perfect man. As a physician he stands exalted far above any the world has ever seen since the time of Hippocrates. As a physician he was, indeed, incomparable, his was, and is, the truest definition of the real physician, viz., one whose sole business is that of healing the sick. Lastly, let us look at the lessons of his life. From his boyhood, from his youth, from his manhood, and from his old age, we learn industry, perseverance, love of learning, devotion to science for the direct benefit of mankind, singleness of mind, sterling irreproachable honor and probity, not having regard unto man merely, but having a firm faith in God. In a word, he dared to be wise.